And
Okay. Cool. So, hi everyone. Today we're going to talk. Mike and Mike are going to talk about WebIDE stuff, some past exploration from a design perspective on um, the explorations around moving away from tabs to lists, and some explorations around the commit area and like where to put that. So, Mike, um, yeah, take it away. And if you have any questions that you need to like, if you want more clarifications, I can answer some stuff.
sure. So do you want me to start with the kind of the sectioned one?
Yeah,
Go
let's
through
start off with
that?
the section. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. I'll pull it up just so we can look at something while we're talking. I'm not even sure if this is the final one that actually got.
yep. That's the kind of changes I was looking for.
Yeah, so the main, I think, reason for this was just we were getting a lot of feedback from both user testing and then just kind of anecdotal stuff from GitLab users that would kind of ask questions. A lot of times, like if you were opened up a merge request and you landed in the review tab, um, people were constantly searching for like how do I get to the edit mode from here? They were lost. They had no real idea of how to like transition into edit mode. So clearly the tabs weren't resonating with folks. And then speaking with Marcel, the original design way back, I think even back in the Dimitri days, preceding Marcel even, was kind of a stepped flow that you would kind of edit, review, commit. And I think the only people that understood that flow or interpreted that flow to be that flow were Dimitri, Marcel, and now us too. Because unless you knew that was the intent of the design, it never resonated with people that was the design. So, that was the genesis of that kind of tab flow system. So at its core, it obviously wasn't resonating with users. Whereas this design kind of brings it right into your lab. So you can, if a change is highlighted, it's a little bit clearer. I think that's why you're seeing it in review mode, and if you're seeing the files, that's why it's in that. And then, as Marcel and you discussed, Michael, in the previous call that you had, just opportunities for kind of progressive disclosure here. If there are no changes, there's no need to show you that, so we can. The UI becomes even simpler, and then the changes only appears once you do have changes. So it hopefully would, being that it's stepped and it appears at that moment when you make the change, would make it a little bit clearer of why it exists. So really, this was its main goal was just to get rid of those tabs. They weren't resonating with people. I think maybe they were inspired by VS Code, although I've seen even VS Code is toying with the idea of getting rid of their tabs. Um, so it's obviously a pattern that's not meeting users' needs, basically.
Um, did you ever run any solution validation on this?
Um, Trying to remember if we did. I don't think we did. This was right at the end of my WebID career. This was right before the reorganization kind of got switched. So we were kind of just exploring some designs, throwing this out there, and then that's when that whole reshuffle happened. So yeah, this was never. I don't think it was ever scheduled to be built or implemented. It was more. I think it was in the phase of putting it in front of the engineers and um, getting their feedback from both, as consumers of GitLab and editors of code editing. How did you feel about it? But also, more importantly, like, what of this would be challenging? Could this be built? From a technical standpoint, how could we go from the tab system to this system, and maybe we could break it down and think it that way. So we were still very much in that early on, just exploratory. maybe a little bit of engineering involvement phase.
Cool. The reason I bring that up is that there's an issue in the works of removing the review tabs as kind of like the step towards getting to this. And for
Mm,
me, I didn't know the back history of this. I thought everyone understood the flow of the um, files reviewed commit, but clearly that was a huge assumption on my part. And um, yeah, it's in the works, and I'm planning to do a solution validation around this kind of not this execution, but it could be that I use this. So
yeah.
yeah.
If I recall right, that's the one that Marcel actually started like a year ago, or even further back than that one, right? Um, I
I'm
think
not
he
sure
was the
about the
first.
issue age, but yes, he's involved somehow.
Yeah, I think that one predated even me. And yeah, so I mean, you can see this theme has come up a few times across um, the editor's history of that, and that was kind of a bit of an inspiration of why to get into this exploration. Yeah, the removal of the tab. I think you can do that independent of this. You don't need to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, jump to this,
Well,
and this was like, if we did remove the tab, where could we go from that point forward?
mhm. And what would your concerns be around this change? Like, what would be areas that I should focus on in solution validation on this?
I would just maybe the phrasing changes in files. Can people locate those things? Are people okay with there being a dual list now? Because what we're looking at here, I think it's in a reasonable example, but if it was the kind of situation where you made 20 changes, well, now you're probably in that situation where files is pushed all the way off the screen without a scroll.
Mm,
Um, which maybe that's desirable, and if they're collapsible, so I would focus on are changes in files the right nomenclature to use there, and then edge case scenarios of if things were pushed off, and maybe even around this idea of the progressive delivery, or progressive disclosure of what should the defaults be, collapsed, not collapsed, all those kind of things. I don't
mhm,
think any of that was well thought through. um, so yeah, those might be areas of focus.
hmm. Okay, and that gives me some food for thought, and so I appreciate that. Thanks for that. So cool. Um, I'm keen to move the conversation towards the commit um, commit button area. So from if I'm wrong about this, just feel free to correct me. But part of some of the work that you did prior back in the day was looking at where the commit um, area should be, whether it should
Mhm.
be at the bottom left, on the right bar, somewhere else. I'll be keen to see um, what you explored in the past, and yeah, take it from there.
Yeah, so I went all the way to the bottom of the pool on this one.
Hmm.
I went in deep on this one and just started playing around. Um, somewhat, I will say, somewhat dangerously. Not evidence based, not user based. There wasn't any testing. It was more just throwing designs at the wall and see what sticks, just from up here, almost as much from a visual standpoint as anything else. Yeah, so the way the current commit flow is that button, and then you kind of get the slide up drawer. Um, so it's always kind of remained on the bottom, which I do think is a valid flow. But looking at some of the other editors out there, um, it's an interesting one because they don't necessarily, like, the most engineers are command line first. So they're usually, when they're pushing things, they're using the command line for that. But if you look at VS Code and where the save button or the commit button or that kind of flow is, it was kind of up towards the top. area up there. So I played around with that a bit. Sorry. So there's also like explorations of like these buttons as well. I'm trying to remember what all these things were. I've played around with this a lot. But it was this idea of kind of moving it up towards the top, grouping it up in this area here. So you have basically an action section, and then files below that. What I kind of liked about that was that then this can scroll and it's just at the loss of files. The commit button, when you scroll, doesn't scroll off the screen, but then you get into that, going back to this, there isn't like a bar here, a horizontal rule or anything that cuts this off. I think when you scroll, one actually does appear. But being at the top here, then you can just get into this world where there is kind of a natural scroll area and a naturally pinned area, that I liked. The big thing to consider with this though is, so if we're going to use that same kind of drawer action, this doesn't really fit well with that, right? Because it's going to slide up from the bottom and it's on the top. So there was a second kind of thought, that was happening around the same time of, should this commit flow be either in the right-hand pane or in a modal type flow? This also coincided with, I think you're familiar with some of the editor light stuff and some of the in-context editing and playing with that idea. That Dennis had built that kind of that proof of concept, and that really started to feel kind of like a direction that maybe we could go in. So the thought was, maybe if we had built out this kind of modal commit flow, for this, that it could be reused wherever we're doing that in context editing, to try and kind of componentize not only that, um, just the code of it, right? Build that modal once and reuse it, but also kind of standardize that user flow of, whenever I'm committing via the UI, it kind of looks like the same thing. It might pop up from different places, but if we can get that into a modal, then it's that same flow every time. And that unfortunately did not get user tested. So that is a wild theory that I would highly recommend throwing some user testing at before proceeding down that modal flow. But that was kind of the thought of this one, of let's group everything, all your actions in one place, and then go to a more modal style commit flow.
That's not too far off, because we started exploring some of that in the static site editor, and the timing and the way you're talking about things is aligned to like what Nadia and I are kind of thinking about, of having a consistent commit flow across the different editors. She's focusing more on pipeline editors, which is based on top of editor light. So it's kind of all in the same world. It's like different looks and feels, but like, yeah, the commit flow in general, our gut feel at the moment is that it should be consistent across the product.
Yeah, it seems like if we could prove it out to be a viable, user flow, it just seems like it's going to save so much time, and just to be able to build that once and maybe even do testing around that and get that flow really knocked out. Because yeah, whether it's static site or IDE, or even in the source code, side of things, or the pipeline editor, really the commit flow is fairly similar. I think the static site maybe had a little variance of, like assigning an approver or something, during that flow. But yeah, it seems like the kind of flow that I'm just not seeing why it would vary different, right? Like I'm a fan of, uh, defaulting to consistency unless there's a reason to not. So it seems like that flow would be a good candidate for that. So any questions on that one? I'm trying to think, where else. Oh, so there was this idea as well. This was like just really cleaning it up. This was around the time, I'm sure you saw the issue. I think you've been pulled into that one of the drop down, the split drop down. We kind of got into a split drop down phase that we were doing some tests on. So it was kind of pushing that idea here. And the answer to the question that you're probably thinking is, well, what is in that drop down? It would be discard all changes would be the only option in here. So it's a little interesting. Do we really need a drop down for that? But it was kind of just cleaning some things up if you really wanted to like move all these buttons out of this header and put them in there. I think this one is the cleanest visually, but probably not the best experience. But if you do like grouping buttons together, here's an option for that. And then I think this was just the base. Yeah, this was the standard one, and then components. Buttons in header. Trying to think. Yeah, so this tab is all really more about exploring how to group these buttons. Again, that same kind of idea of should they exist here? Should we group them together and drop down? Should there be 3 of them? So this one is more about these 3 buttons, or these 4 buttons really. Yeah, so really that was the only one of really deeply exploring the moving the commit button. And I think honestly, it's more about that modal flow than it is about the button placement. Because if we had that modal flow, it could honestly be here, 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 anywhere. It's really more about the WebID was tied to this kind of drawer interaction, and should we break from that? And if we do, then I think this might be a viable option of a place to put it, but here and here are also still viable, even with that modal, in my opinion.
Cool. That sounds really good. I'm gonna be a little bit cheeky here and say, do you have any of your modal designs around?
I'm trying to remember if I got into that. I think my plan was to steal yours. Because I remember now that you mentioned the static site stuff. Let me stop sharing real quick so I don't get into anything weird here. To see if I have that. No, this isn't it.
I think that's all right for now. If you were gonna steal from me, I was gonna steal from myself and probably borrow some stuff that the pipeline editor group is looking at too. So I was gonna mix and match some stuff. So I was just trying to see if I could fast track some of my work.
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, it was about the time when I started looking at that modal flow, and Marcel was encouraging me to look at the static site editor stuff. That's how I knew about the reviewer flow and all that stuff. Because yeah, I was looking very much at the modal that you were working on, the modal flow that you were working on for that.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks for walking us through all these different explorations. It's really useful information. So yeah, that's all the questions I have today. Do you have any questions about any of the upcoming work in WebID or the editors?
No, I will mention that I have raised the in context editing issue again with Daniel, my PM. Just seeing the progress of Editor Lite, and now knowing that it's going to be the base for the WebID, and just the power of that. And then also knowing kind of the history of the single file commit flow not being optimal. And then also seeing those kind of we now have like 4 editors, right? And the WebIDE and the single file editor have always been a difficult, um, distinguish when to use those. I think even in your talk with Marcel, I think I'm in that same boat. Sometimes I'll use one and sometimes I'll use the other. And I honestly, myself, even having worked on all this stuff for a year, don't really have a good answer of why I use one over the other. So just to make the point that I feel like that conversation might benefit your group, Nadia's group, but also in source code, as a lot of the touch points for these edit buttons, and also even in the merge request stuff with Pedro, um, that may be a larger conversation of if you guys do decide to pursue that kind of in context editing. I'm a fan of that, and I think we should do that. So maybe a little come together of all of our groups might be beneficial if that's something you guys want to pursue.
Cool. So like the Avengers of designers coming together to solve this in-edit product. Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm all for it. And now that it's been named that, I think we absolutely have to do it regardless, right?
Very well then. So be it. All right. Thanks again for your time, Mike. And yeah, we'll catch up in the future.
Okay,
Bye.
but